Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating world of Viktor Schauberger.
Schauberger, yeah. He's,
Have you heard of him?
I have. Yeah, he's an intriguing figure for sure. Not your typical scientist by any means.
Definitely not conventional. More of a naturalist, really.
Absolutely.
Spent his life observing nature, and he came up with some really, I gotta say, out there theories about water.
Yeah, and some of them are quite controversial.
Mm.
But that's what makes them so interesting, right?
Exactly. We're going to be exploring his ideas today based on excerpts from the book Living Water, Viktor Schauberger.
Good book.
It really delves into his unconventional views, and we're going to see if maybe, just maybe, some of his observations could actually change the way we think about things.
Big things.
Like forestry,
Yeah.
agriculture, even energy production.
You know, one of the things that really stood out to me about Schauberger is that he believed we needed to work with nature's principles, not against them.
Yeah.
And, a lot of his criticism of modern technology really stemmed from that belief.
And it's really interesting that you say that because his biography highlights how Schauberger's fascination with water started, well, pretty early on. He grew up surrounded by these pristine forests and lakes and rivers in Austria.
Right.
His family had a long history in forestry, actually, timber floating. So he was pretty much immersed in nature, like from day one.
Yeah, I mean, talk about an ideal environment to foster that kind of deep connection with the natural world.
Absolutely. And it was in this untouched environment that Schauberger started to really observe things closely. For example, Living Water talks about how he would watch trout in these really fast-flowing mountain streams.
Oh, yeah, those trout.
And he was just baffled by how they could seemingly defy gravity. They would remain perfectly still in these currents or even dart upstream, like effortlessly.
And they move with such incredible speed and agility. It's almost like they're, I don't know, it's mesmerizing, isn't it?
Yeah, I've always wondered how they managed to do that, like to swim against such a strong current. What's the secret? So was Schauberger able to figure that out?
Well, he looked for answers in the scientific textbooks of the time, but nothing really explained what he was seeing. So what did he do?
He did his own thing.
Exactly. He started conducting his own experiments.
Of course he did.
And there's this one story where he instructed his workers to heat a large amount of water and then pour it upstream. And even though the temperature change was pretty subtle, the trout seemed to get agitated.
Really?
Yeah. And it was actually swept away by the current.
Oh, wow.
So this suggested to Schauberger that the trout was somehow, using these temperature differences in the water to its advantage.
Wow. So he was already, even back then, like thinking outside the box, doing these hands-on experiments.
Exactly.
Instead of just relying on existing theories. Did this unconventional approach help him later when he started working with timber floating?
Absolutely. In fact, it's a big part of what made him successful. He designed these log flumes that were completely different from anything anyone had ever seen before.
Really?
Yeah. Instead of fighting against the natural flow of water, he decided to work with it.
Okay.
He would incorporate the natural curves of the landscape, meticulously control the water temperature. He even tried to, get this, mimic the movements of a swimming snake in his flume designs.
A swimming snake.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I can only imagine what the traditional forestry experts must have thought. They were probably pretty skeptical.
Oh, they were absolutely skeptical. They thought his ideas were, completely crazy. But here's the thing. Schauberger's flumes ended up being incredibly efficient at transporting timber, and they do it with less damage to the logs and less impact on the environment.
So it worked.
It worked, and it pretty much silenced the critics.
There's nothing like success.
Exactly. And his success with the log flumes really highlighted one of his key beliefs. Water isn't just H2O. It's something way more complex. He saw it as a living, dynamic entity with its own energy, its own laws. It's not just a resource to be exploited, but something we need to understand and work with.
Yeah, he actually called water, I love this, the Earth's blood.
The Earth's blood, yeah.
Which really emphasizes its vital role in maintaining the health of, well, everything.
Everything.
Ecosystems, human societies, the whole planet.
He saw firsthand how human activities like deforestation were disrupting the natural flow of water. And it was leading to, springs drying up, streams turning wild and destructive, almost like the lifeblood was being drained from the landscape.
It's a powerful image. So given his deep, respect for water, how did Schauberger try to protect and revitalize our watercourses?
Well, he took action. He patented several inventions aimed at things like flood control, regulating stream flow, and even purifying water. And his approach was always to try to mimic nature's patterns.
Right.
He had this concept that he called cycloid spiral space curve motion, which he believed was the ideal way for water to move.
It's funny you should mention that spiral shape because Schauberger saw that spiral everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
The swirling motion of water in natural streams, the shape of a snail's shell, even the way a snake moves.
Exactly. It's that cycloid spiral space curve motion, he called it. And he thought it held the key to understanding how water naturally moved and carried energy. And he thought we could even use this principle to manage water more effectively and even generate power. He even designed special pipes using this spiral shape and specific metal alloys, believing that they could actually improve the quality of the water.
So he was connecting these seemingly random observations from different parts of nature and turning them into these, well, revolutionary ideas.
Right, his thinking was so outside the box.
Way outside the box.
Yeah.
And that actually leads us to a concept that I'm really curious to hear more about, living water. What exactly did Schauberger mean by that?
So living water, for Schauberger, was water in its natural state.
Yeah.
Untouched, full of vitality and energy. And he didn't just observe this. He actually tried to recreate it in the lab. He did these really complex experiments with biosynthesis, trying to produce living water, and even alternative fuel sources using these specially designed apparatus.
So he was trying to basically replicate what nature does, but in a controlled environment.
Exactly. Pretty ambitious, especially given the technology he had access to at the time.
It was. So how did that go? Did he succeed?
Well, his results were awfully inconsistent
Yeah, okay.
and difficult to replicate. But his ideas about living water and its potential, they're still fascinating researchers today.
It really makes you think about water in a totally new way, doesn't it? Like, are we missing out on these different ways of working with water that, we haven't even considered?
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that Schauberger's exploration of water led him to even more radical concepts, like perpetual motion and something he called implosion technology,
Implosion technology.
which he saw as this stark contrast to the destructive forces of explosion that dominate a lot of modern technology.
So Schauberger believed that a lot of modern technology, relied too heavily on this principle of explosion. What did he mean by that? And what is this implosion idea all about?
Well, think about it. A lot of our technology, combustion engines, explosives, even nuclear fission, they all rely on this force of explosion, this really powerful outward expansion.
Right, right.
But Schauberger saw this as a destructive force, a force that was ultimately harming nature and even ourselves. He contrasted this with implosion, which he saw as a more natural way of creating, of building.
Okay, so it sounds like a really fascinating concept, but it also sounds a little bit, I don't know, mystical, maybe.
Yeah, I can see that.
Did he have any concrete evidence to back this up? Or was it more of a philosophical kind of belief?
Well, Schauberger was all about observing nature, right? So he grounded this idea of implosion in what he saw in the natural world. For example, he pointed to the spiraling motion of water, the way a seed grows into a plant, even the formation of planets and galaxies. He saw all of these as examples of implosion at work.
Wow.
A force that draws things inward, concentrating energy and creating order out of chaos.
So how did he think we could actually harness this implosive force? The book mentioned something called a trout turbine. What's that all about?
Ah, yes, the trout turbine. Schauberger was absolutely captivated by the way trout could move so effortlessly in these really strong currents.
Right.
He was convinced that they were tapping into this implosive energy that existed within the water itself. So he designed a device. Sometimes it's called the implosion machine, and it was meant to mimic that natural vortex motion he observed in nature, like in those screams.
And this is where those stories come in about his machines being so powerful that they would, tear themselves apart during testing, right?
Right. Those stories are out there. And to be fair, Schauberger did face a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
He was working with limited resources, and the technology back then wasn't really equipped to handle these really, revolutionary ideas. But even if some of the details are a little bit mysterious, the core concept using implosion as a source of clean, sustainable energy, it's pretty incredible.
It really makes you think differently about how we approach energy production. Are we missing out on a whole other, realm of possibilities by focusing primarily on explosion? It's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. And, this actually ties into Schauberger's broader critique of society at the time. He believed that modern science, modern society had become dangerously detached from nature's principles. And he saw the damage to the forests, the pollution of water, the use of artificial fertilizers, all as symptoms of this disconnect.
And you might be surprised to hear that Schauberger actually had a deep interest in agriculture, too. He believed that a lot of modern farming practices were actually harming the soil and producing food that was less nutritious.
Absolutely. He was a huge critic of industrial agriculture. He really advocated for, you know, going back to those more natural biodynamic methods, working with the soil's natural energy instead of depleting it.
So what were some of his specific recommendations for this more, natural approach to farming?
Oh, he had a lot of them. He talked about the importance of using copper tools instead of iron, avoiding artificial fertilizers, and creating what he called noble compost. It used this special layering technique. And he even developed a way to treat water to enhance its energy, make it more vital for irrigation.
It sounds like he was really trying to bring back some of that traditional wisdom about working with nature, the kind of knowledge that we've kind of lost in the rush towards modernization.
Exactly. And Living Water talks about how he actually spent a lot of time learning from old farmers who were still practicing those more traditional methods. Farmers who had, a really deep understanding of the land.
Right.
He saw them as the keepers of this, this ancient wisdom that was being forgotten.
It makes me think about some indigenous cultures who have maintained that connection to the land for centuries,
Mhm.
And it seems like Schauberger was kind of tapping into that same kind of wisdom. But, for someone who relied so much on intuition and observation, there were actually attempts to scientifically validate some of his ideas, weren't there?
There were. And Living Water describes a series of experiments that were conducted at Stuttgart Technical College, specifically to test Schauberger's theories on water motion.
Hmm.
They were led by Professor Franz Papel, and they designed some pretty elaborate experiments using spiral pipes and swirling water.
So they were basically trying to take those observations that Schauberger made in nature and, bring them into a more controlled scientific setting. What did they find?
Well, it's pretty amazing, actually. Some of Schauberger's more, let's say, unconventional ideas were actually confirmed in these experiments.
Right.
They observed reduced friction in spiral pipes, just like Schauberger predicted. They also documented those unusual formations that happened in swirling water. And it really lent some scientific credibility to his observations.
That must have been incredibly validating for him to see his ideas backed up by, actual data.
Yeah, it was. Although, it's important to note that these experiments were just a starting point. Schauberger's work was so complex, so multifaceted, that it couldn't be completely captured or explained by conventional science.
It's like he was pushing the boundaries of scientific understanding,
He was.
challenging people to think outside the box. But sadly, it sounds like he faced a lot of resistance and hardship, especially later in his life.
He did, unfortunately. Despite his groundbreaking insights, he struggled financially.
Mm.
And he was constantly worried about his discoveries being, misused. There was even this incident where he was tricked into going to a mental hospital for a special examination.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it was orchestrated by his detractors who wanted to discredit him.
That's awful. It's a shame that someone who was, so ahead of his time had to endure that kind of treatment. So did his work gain any, widespread recognition during his lifetime?
It was a mixed bag, really. There was some recognition, but also a lot of controversy. Implosion instead of explosion, a book by Leopold Brandstatter, was meant to, popularize Schauberger's work,
Okay.
but it also introduced a lot of speculation and mystical interpretations. So while it did bring Schauberger more attention, he wasn't always comfortable with how his ideas were being presented.
Yeah, it sounds like Schauberger was walking a fine line,
He was.
wanting to share his ideas, but also protect them from being, misunderstood or even misused. It's a tough position to be in.
It is. But despite the challenges, his legacy, it continues to inspire people today.
Yeah.
And after really diving into his work, what really stands out to me is that his observations, while they were, grounded in nature, they really had implications that went way beyond those specific inventions or techniques that he developed.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, he was grappling with these really fundamental questions about how we understand and interact with the world around us.
Exactly.
It wasn't just about, tweaking existing technology. It was questioning our entire approach to science, to progress.
Mm.
He was urging us to see ourselves not as masters of the universe, but as part of a much larger, interconnected system. And at
Yeah.
the heart of it all was water.
Water. Absolutely. He saw water as this key to
Mm.
understanding that interconnectedness, the lifeblood of the planet, really.
Mm-hmm.
And when we disrupt its natural flow, its vitality, we disrupt everything.
That concept of living water is so powerful, isn't it? It challenges us to think of water as not just, this substance, but as something alive and full of
It
energy.
is.
And it makes you wonder, are we neglecting the quality of our water, the vitality of our water in our pursuit of, just convenience and technological control?
Yeah, he was sounding the alarm about this back in the early 20th century. And those warnings about, deforestation, water pollution, and the depletion of natural resources,
Mhm.
they're even more urgent now than ever before.
It's crazy to think how far ahead of his time he really was. But the good news is, he didn't just point out the problems, right?
Right.
He offered solutions. And a lot of his ideas, they're being explored and rediscovered today in fields like, biodynamic agriculture, permaculture, even alternative energy.
Exactly. And that's what's so exciting about Schauberger's legacy. It lives on, not just in his inventions, but in this broader shift towards a more holistic and nature-based approach to, well, to everything, to science, to technology, to how we live our lives.
Absolutely. Schauberger believed that observing nature was the key to, unlocking its secrets. So I want to ask you, the listener, what natural phenomena might we be overlooking in our own lives? What simple yet profound wisdom can we glean from just, observing the world around us?
He challenged us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, and to recognize that interconnectedness of, well, of everything. That's a powerful legacy.
It is.
And maybe the most valuable lesson that we can learn from Schauberger is this. Nature is our greatest teacher.
Mm-hmm.
If we approach it with humility and curiosity, who knows what amazing solutions we might find, what incredible innovations we could discover.
So the next time you see a swirling stream or a spiraling seashell, take a moment to really appreciate the beauty and the complexity of nature's design. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start to see the world through Viktor Schauberger's eyes. This has been an incredible journey exploring the world of Viktor Schauberger. We encourage you to, delve deeper into these ideas, check out the source material, and see what resonates with you. Until next time, happy deep diving.